I recorded it to the cloud just to be sure it gets to anybody and everybody that it needs to.
All right, I'm going to let him in. Hey, everybody. As always, we have lots of people jumping in right now, so we're going to give them a few minutes. Leslie's going to help me keep admitting them. Thanks for coming. Take a few moments and go ahead and settle yourselves. I know some of you were just on a call with the state, and so now we have another call. Still quite a few people popping in, so I'm going to go ahead and give them that little bit of time. I will go ahead and share my screen and get that set up in the meantime. You guys seeing it okay?
Yep, it looks good.
Got a head nod. Okay. They're still coming in fast and furious, guys. So thanks for giving us a second. So again, my name is Barbara Kramer, and this is the second of the FSC training series. Today, we're going to talk about transition. Just like last time, the materials are going to be posted in the Basecamp folder, and that's on the bottom of the slide. We'll also put it in the chat for you. The requirement again is that there's at least one person from each agency who has access to the Basecamp Basecamp folder. But as you know, we had some difficulties with that last time. So if we need to, we'll just like last time, we'll send out the slides and the IFSP pages at the end of the training, just to make sure everybody can access them. The recording will also be in the Basecamp folder. So just as a reminder, we have a lot of people on today. And if you can use the chat to do your questions, that would be much appreciated. Tammy's going to go ahead and monitor that chat and bring questions forward as we go. It's possible that we won't get through them all, but we will take them into consideration. Today, I'm going to present what the policies currently look like. They are draft policies because OSEP has to give their approval, the state has to give their approval, then they go out for public comment. Public comment would be the time period that you would have, to provide input on any of the policies that are presented, any that go out actually for public comment. But today, as I said, we're going to just concentrate on the transition part, the form, and the policies as they stand. We also are developing a process manual, and that will have more of the procedure, like what are the steps I'm supposed to take, what's the recommended practices, what do best practices look like, and that would be someplace where we could incorporate some of the questions as well and make sure that we are presenting that in a way that most people understand what they're supposed to do when the new policies take effect. Um, so again, today we're going to talk specifically about transition. In the past, we always called this the C to B transition. As we dig in today, you see that it's going to be a little bit more than that. So a little bit more for families who do not want to be a part of the Part B program and how they will transition from our services. So we're going to talk about it being transition out of services as a child ages out of our program.
Wait, can you talk a little bit before we start about what is the difference between a process manual, a guidance document, and a policy manual, and how that kind of fits real quick?
Sure. So a policy manual, our current procedure manual is both a procedure and a policy manual. So it has a lot of information in it regarding how you're supposed to do a certain policy. So the policy is you have to get the IFSP done within 45 days. The procedure manual goes into all the steps to make sure that you make sure that that happens. A process manual or the approach the state is going to take in the development of these manuals. Policies will be pretty cut and dry. They're kind of broad. They meet the federal regulations, the state regulations and statutes. They say this is the way we're going to do this thing. And then the process manual will be the place where we go into those details. Policies have to go out for public comment. They have to get OSIP approval, and there's just a lot of work to changing any kind of a policy, whereas a process manual can be updated without those things. So as early intervention changes, or if we have a change to our state system, that means we need to change our process a little bit. Processes could be looked at every single year and little updates made. So that's why they're going to be separated, and the two will come out together. They make kind of that package. As far as guidance documents have come out mostly, well, many guidance documents come out because as we're moving through things, we haven't updated our policy and procedures. As our database changed, for example, over the years, we had some database changes that we needed to give you information for. Instead of putting that in a policy manual, we just would produce a guidance document. Lots of guidance documents are also FAQ kind of documents. So after holding a meeting, we would have an FAQ come out and we would call that a guidance document. The effort for this year is to take all of the current guidance documents and put them into the process manual where they go, if they go somewhere within there. Things that need to stand alone, like how you do the database and those job aids and that kind of thing, that'll probably still live in a separate place. Does that help?
Yes, I think that's exactly what the question was.
All right, cool. So since we are also doing this as an FSA Family Service Coordinator focus, the transition process, we're going to look at that transition process from that perspective. So we'll discuss the changes that have been made to the paperwork and the process of transition due to the policy changes that are coming. It's not so much that the policies have changed, it's that we've tweaked them to meet the guidance that OSIP provided to us following our visit last year. Many of you are also program coordinators and leadership members, and as we talk about these new policies and how they're going to affect your program and your workflow, please know that this is not the last time we are going to talk about that. There's going to be lots of opportunities to work not only like with the state, with the development of the process manual, with your TAs. As we go through this for the next few months, there will be a lot of communication about policy changes. So Also for this presentation, learning from the first one, I adjusted slides so that you will have the written policy and be able to read the components of the documents more clearly. We'll talk through the process and then incorporate the policies and paperwork as we go. So we'll just kind of look through the steps of transition that way. So in very general terms, transition planning starts early when we inform families that our services are for children from birth to 3, and that if their child still needs services at that time, we would help them find those services at transition. Policy requirements are that we remind families of that at least annually. So when we do our annual IFSP, we're letting families, we're going over that again, reminding them that our services end at 3. Anytime a family leaves early intervention services, if possible, we really want to try and assist them to the extent that we can. So families who are planning to move, families who feel that their child no longer needs services, whatever the reason, we have processes and forms to complete to meet the many transitions that might occur. And what we want families to experience is that their infant toddler services have been really supportive experience, that their families are not being judged if they want to leave for any reason, and that they're always welcome to come back if concerns arise at a later time and their child is still age eligible. So this presentation, again, is going to focus on transition out of early intervention services. We won't necessarily be addressing those other kinds of transitions that can happen, like hospital to home or between programs, that sort of thing. There will be and are other guidance documents for those topics. So let's start with some of the basics, which really haven't changed. So the key to a successful transition are knowing the processes and paperwork, having time for planning and implementing between meetings, coordination and communication flow between everyone involved. So life beyond Part C can look really different for different families. Some families may decide that they want to explore the option of child staying home. Others might want to explore community options, community preschools, library programs, mom and day out programs. Even if their child still needs services, they might want to choose private therapy options and not want their child to attend public school just yet. At transition, the family is the primary decision maker about what happens when they leave our services. They're not bound by a rule that says they must go to Part B, even if we think that they might still need those services. Our role is to ensure that families have the information they need to make an informed decision, meaning that they know what will happen if they choose one option over another. And at the same time, we have a responsibility to share our point of view, our concerns to be considered by the family. That's part of making an informed decision as well. So we're not telling them what to do or make judgments, but we are letting them know from our point of view what the different options are and how their child might benefit from them. It's our responsibility as a family service coordinator to help families understand the whole process, gather the information about potential next steps, and then allow them to make the decision about what they feel is the best option for their child. Very often, children do end up transitioning to Part B service. Most of our kids do, but they should. But that should not be the only option that's discussed and explored during transition. Communication with Part B and other community providers, such as Head Start, and childcare are also the responsibility of the family service coordinator. So in addition to our program practices that must allow for time required for planning and implementing all the steps in the transition process, the family service coordinator gathers and coordinates the family consent to share and exchange information with all the agency a family wishes to explore. The family's role is to make that informed decision. They are not able to do that unless we've given them all of the decisions and all of the information to make the decisions. They need to know what would happen if they choose one option over another and other things that are affected by the choices that they make. And it's the family service coordinator who helps them work through those options. Their role is somewhat dependent on how well we do our role and how well programs have designed their transition processes and shared information. So any option that the family wants to explore, it's the FSC who guides and coordinates and facilitates that process as you work through the to-do list on the transition plan. So let's start talking about transition at referral. So as I said, when we start talking about transition at referral in rather easy, informal ways. But as we get closer, we have all the forms and processes that we have to take in order to help each individual family through that process. So there are 3 required steps to the transition process. And for most children, following a typical process at the end of their time in early intervention services, they should be, these are the ones that are experienced by families, and in this order. The transition planning takes place first so that we can have an in-depth conversation with the family about their options and ensure their decisions are honored. We have a new opt-out policy that we will discuss in a moment. But because of that opt-out policy, there must be time and careful coordination between transition planning and the next step, which is the referral. The referral specifically addresses that notification or referral to Part B. And currently, all families in services 90 days before their 3rd birthday must be referred to Part B. Families have to withdraw the child from their services if they don't want the referral to go to Part B, right? But starting in July, we will have an opt-out policy, and families will be able to stay in infant toddler services until their child turns 3 with no information, not even the child's name, shared with Part B. The last step of the process is the transition conference. There's been changes made to the transition conference paperwork that we'll go over to better reflect the OSEP guidance concerning the intent of the conference. Transition conference is not just for families who are transitioning to Part B services. Transition conferences should be actively involving other program options that families may have an interest in exploring and talking to. So the most common being Head Start and childcare. The paperwork has been changed to reflect the possibilities available to most families, and families always have verbally consented to the transition conference. It will continue to be that way, and be where we document their decisions. The transition timelines for each of the 3 steps of the transition are the same. No transition steps can take place more than 9 months before the child turns 3. It's actually really not a good idea to start planning too early because the children's development can change really quickly in a small amount of time, or families can change their minds between what's supposed to happen and what they thought they wanted to have happen 6 months ago. So this has led to a lot of discussions when they change their mind about, now what do we do about the paperwork that's already been sent? At the discretion of all parties is part of this as well. And what that means is that everyone involved in the transition process wants it to happen really early. Typically, we see this in states where kids are routinely moving into Part B preschool programs earlier than age 3. And that isn't something that very often happens in Kansas. We typically keep our kids to 3. For children referred late to Part C, the transition steps and timing of the steps changes depending on just how late the referral to infant toddler comes in and what the processes are that we take after that point. So we'll discuss that when we talk about late referrals. So let's talk about the opt-out policy that I mentioned. It has an impact on pretty much the whole process because it's one of the first things that we talk about with families during transition planning. The policy simply is that parents have the right to opt out of referral to the SEA and the LEA and have their child stay in infant toddler services until age 3. If a family opts out, no information is shared with the state or with the local education agency. So how this will work for children in typical services. Parents will be notified in writing of their option to opt out of the notification no later than the transition planning meeting. The transition plan was modified to add a step so that we can talk about the process with the family, and that's their notification in writing. A form is also being developed to help you provide to parents during the transition planning where they will document their decision. The parent has until 135 days before their child turns 3 to sign the form and return it to you. So they can complete it earlier if they know exactly what they want to do. But after that date, if we don't have an opt-out form from them, that's when we must send the referral to Part B. For children who are referred late to Part C, later than the 135 days prior to turning 3, families will be offered the option to opt out after Part C eligibility has been established. Again, we'll talk about that a lot with the late referrals. For most kids, it's going to happen earlier. For families who opt out, that no personally identifiable information is shared with Part B, opting out only applies to opting out of the referral to B. Once a family has opted out, they would not be able to opt back in. If they change their minds, they will follow the timelines that Part B uses for children who have not been in Part C services, so that community referral. This will be clearly written on the form, and FSCs will be responsible for explaining that option to families. So again, when we say we are explaining the pros and cons, this is one of those times when we'll be explaining the pros and cons of opting out and why we would not want it to happen too early. Anything, Tammy, yet that we need to discuss? Okay.
Quiet in the chat.
Quiet in the chat. So another policy that comes up over and over in transition discussions is the potentially eligible. So I thought it would be a good idea just to put it here, make sure that we all have a shared understanding of what potential eligible means. Potentially eligible is a child who's receiving infant toddler services, which means they have an IFSP at least 90 days prior to their 3rd birthday, or is a child who was determined eligible for Part C services between 90 and 45 days prior to their 3rd birthday. Those are the 2 groups of children, if you will, who are potentially eligible for Part B services. If a child falls into one of those 2 categories, then by law, an agreement between B and C must refer that child to Part B, and starting July 1st, it will say, unless the family opts out. If these children are eligible for Part B and with parent consent, they have a right to have their IEP in place and implemented by age 3.
So the question is, so if they are opting out, does that mean that they would have to go back through to get back in? They would have to go through a screening, child finder, or whatever the district community-based process is.
Yes, that's what it means.
So we'll want to be really careful when we use that opt-out option because it does change things
Quite a
really big.
bit. It changes things quite a bit for families. Yep, absolutely. So that's why we don't want to do opt out until 135 days before the child turns 3. We don't want families opting out really early unless they are really positive that there's no way they're going to want to go to Part B. We want to give them that time so that we're making the decisions closer to when it's actually happening. So let's talk about the three steps of the process. Again, we'll start with policy statements. The purpose of the transition planning meeting is to discuss and document what families would like to have happen when their child leaves services. The participants discuss all potential community, school, and other options available. Transition planning is a great time to explore with a family the opportunities that are available in your specific community after age 3. It should not just be a time that we're talking about the preschool program at Part B, but what other options are available through the community. The parents have a right to provide informed consent before releasing any information about their child or family with any of the programs. There are specific activities to prepare the child for changes in service delivery, including outcomes and services to help the child adjust to and function in their new setting. And we'll explore these activities as we walk through the page. Parents make a decision regarding LEA notification or referral and understand that they have the right to opt out. And during the transition plan, if it hasn't happened before, that's when we'll explain that policy. The parents make a decision to hold or not hold a transition conference and who they would like invited if they do have one. So when a family opts out, it is not opting out of a transition conference, it's only opting out of the referral. They can still have a transition conference and make decisions about who attends it. They can, and then there's any other activities identified by the IFSP team to support the child as they move from our services to the new service system.
So I have a couple of, oh, go ahead. That's what I was checking. There's a couple of opt-out questions. And so you can choose to say later or now.
Let's do opt-out questions.
So one question is, what happens if you have those late referrals, less than 135 days, or less than 90 days? And you might cover that later, but that's question 1.
Yep. So question 1 will be answered in the late referral screens. So
Perfect.
please hold those until we get to them.
And then the second one is, what happens if they move? Does that opt-out follow that child?
Oh, that's a really good question. They opt out prior to referral to the public school, and only one referral is the formal referral to the public school. So as far as it follows the child, they opted out. The new place that they go to would not share information. Yeah, let's do that when we get to as child moves through the system.
And now are coming a lot of conference questions. So we're going to pause that till you get to conference.
Thank you. We have a whole section on the late referrals and yes, let's do that. The transition planning meeting has to meet the requirements of an IFSP meeting. So it has to be held in a setting at a time and place that is convenient for the family. And for most families, this is their home. It's conducted in the native language of the family or other mode of communication used by the family to the extent possible. And so we use translators and translation software, if needed. It has to be arranged with and written notice provided to the family and other participants early enough for the meeting date to ensure that they have the opportunity to attend. So prior written notices goes to family before the meeting, and other participants would be whoever the family wanted to invite. We want to make sure that we assist the family in making sure they know the time and date to invite others. And then we fully explain to the family with consent obtained to initiate the services. At the transition planning meeting, we are not really changing services, but we're adding that transition plan most of the time. The family, when they sign the document, when they sign the IFSP, that's when they're saying that they agree to and understand that the transition plan is now taking effect.
Still
The
conference
transition
questions.
plan, oops.
Sorry, still conference questions. You're good.
Okay. The transition plan meeting has to include the required IFSP participants. So the parent of the child, other family members as requested by the parent, an advocate. So sometimes we have families together. And the service coordinator is the designated person who's responsible for coordinating all that and implementing, facilitating the transition plan meeting. So the next bullets are about that multidisciplinary representation. We talked about this when we talked about the IFSP meeting. So the first is someone involved in the most recent evaluation and or assessment, someone able to talk about the child's progress in services. And if they're unable to attend, then to attend the meeting, then they participated through conference call, through written reports. Again, if there was a coaching opportunity, if they had a quarterly review, other team members participated and are aware of the child's progress and can be listed as that second participant. And then the other one is others as appropriate. Sometimes this could be a new service provider. So there's that potential of having multidisciplinary representation if a new service provider was going to attend the meeting along with the FSC. Oops, I think I went too far. So there's very little difference with the current IFSP for this section, the section at the top of the transition plan. The new database will work just like the old one as far as the pages won't open if it's not transition planning time yet. So the date of transition plan, that's the date that you're holding the meeting. The family's priorities for the transition. This is where we would write a summary of what their goals are for their child. And this should be as specific to the family's priorities and needs as possible. So things like, we want Marco to be able to attend the same preschool as his twin brother, or I want Brittany to be ready for kindergarten by continuing to improve her communication. with expanded focus on transition as at age 3. It again, not just involving Part C services, Part B services. We might see something like, I want to homeschool Kai, but need information on ways to socialize with other small children in our community. Or we feel that Head Start might be the most appropriate program, but we want to explore some private therapy too. So, number 3, in the school district, for all children, even those that are potentially going to opt out, we would write the school district information, and it would be the information for the school district that the child resides at the time of the meeting.
So a question,
Yeah.
what if the FSC and the PSP are blended? Would you still require to have a second person to attend this transition plan meeting?
Okay, so the transition plan meeting has to be multidisciplinary in the same way that all IFSP meetings have to be transdisciplinary. So just like we talked about last time, it doesn't mean that the 2 people are going to come to the meeting. It means that the IFSP updates, decisions, discussion, progress about the child is known by more than one person. It represents the team. So using, again, times when you've had a quarterly meeting, times when you've had a coaching session, any joint visit that happened in the previous year, all of those are people who can fill that role. They do not have to attend. They can participate by written report, which you already have your coaching notes or whatever happened at the time, etc. Does that help? I hope that helps that person. It's the same for every IFSP meeting starting July 1st.
There's still a lot of transition conference questions coming, so we're just going to keep working through the plan.
Okay, we're still going to work through the plan first because we really have to stay with the process for it to make sense. The first change you might notice on this form is that the person responsible and the date completed columns are gone. They've been replaced by just a discussion, plan, and timeline section that will be filled out at the meeting and should be as detailed as possible. Could include a timeline. Could be something like in March, we're going to visit some Head Start programs or something like that. It is not something that we would go back and look for a date to match some other date. So this is your plan. This is your notes from your discussion with the family. And then the A, B, C, and D have not changed too much. We'll go through them quickly. If you have questions about any of them, feel free, put that in the chat. A is you'll have a discussion about what transition from infant toddler means, the steps you're going to be working through with the family. B is highlighting the family's rights in regard to the transition, making sure they understand their rights. C is discussing the various options for services in your community. So this is where we get to take a break, a pause with the family and think about what some of those options might be. And D, you'll have a discussion with the family about the definition of potentially eligible, which we just went over, and how that affects the timelines for their child. E is the explanation of the opt-out policy. Again, parents have that right to opt out to the referral and stay in our services until they're 3. The timeline is that they have to opt out no later than 135 days before their child turns 3, or the referral is automatically sent. If they opt out of referral, they can still have a transition conference with other agencies if they want one. It's really important in the transition planning with families to thoroughly explain the opt-out policy and their timeline for opting out. And it will be written on the opt-out form so that they will be able to reference those things, especially the points about the timeline, the 135 days, and that once you opt out, you don't opt back in. You would go through the community referral process at that time.
So I
All
have,
families will, oops.
I do have a transition plan question. On the,
Sure.
on the previous slide, do you have any examples of what would be things you would put in A?
I don't have any written on this slide, but what I would assume is going to be just your explanation of what transition means. So again, at the age of 3, we have to stop our services. This is our time to plan. Do you have any initial thoughts on that? There's 3 steps to the process. It'll involve this, this, and this. Yeah, that kind of information. Tammy, do you have other thoughts on that?
No, I think it speaks to that might be help with support. We are redoing the guidance document, so maybe even something that gives some examples. I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. So as we go through this process and think about that opt-out policies, we really need to know and make sure that we educate families on what it means to have a referral to Part B, right? So we need them to understand that a referral is simply, sharing their child's name, date of birth, and contact information. Families can share that information, that minimal information, and still make later decisions about transition conference. It doesn't tie them to having a transition conference or not having a transition conference. Opt out really applies to those families that don't even want that little bit of minimum information shared. So you have to think about, why might a family opt out, right? Some of the families who are opting out currently prefer to homeschool their kids. Some families just don't want to be identified with special education, or that their child needs special education, or the family member themselves had some harder types of interactions with the school and don't want to go there at that time. Other times it's simply like, I don't feel like he's ready yet. Can I not do this for a year and then go to the public school system? And of course you can do that. So we just want to help a family, understand the ramifications of the decisions that they're making, right? That's our role as the FSC at that point. F is the opportunities to explore those supports that are available in the community, discuss how these opportunities will happen, maybe different team members facilitating different things. It's basically who's going to do what and by when regarding the different activities. And if the opt-out documentation is not completed, G, it's just, again, the reminder, we have to send that referral out. H is the box where we document the family's decision to hold or not hold a transition conference and who they would like to invite. We've changed it to documenting a target date for the meeting. This date may or may not actually be the date that happens. It won't be compared to any other dates, but it gives you some ideas for planning on when we would like that meeting to be held, especially if the family has things that they are working around. You also document if they want a Part B representative to attend, and discuss what documentation they might want to share with Part B. I is also related to sharing information, provides more space for discussions and decisions regarding which documents to share, with different agencies. Most of the time, families are sharing their most recent IFSP. But we are able to share any of the educational records that a child has. And when they come and records become part of our file, they are a part of the child's education file. They could be shared, but they shouldn't be shared unless we've discussed it with the family. So we need to maybe go over what's in the file, which of these things would you like to share, and with which agencies. And then box K is where you document other transition activities, plans if the family, activities or plans if the family does not want to have a transition conference. So this again is really individualized to each family and child as they make their decisions along the way. There are some things missing from the transition page. So you are no longer required to document the date of sharing records here on the transition planning page. The date, that date is captured elsewhere in your record. It doesn't have to show up here. And also all those cradle to career questions have been removed. Any questions about transition planning?
They can have a copy of the draft forms, correct? Just like we
Absolutely.
did before. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Has Part B been made aware of the new 135 days? There's a lot of questions about the 135 days as a new timeline. What does that mean? How do we support that? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Part B has absolutely had a lot of C2B conversations about the new policy at the state level. I don't think it's been communicated to the school districts yet. Like Barbara said, it is not completely done yet. And so until it gets through public comment and some of those pieces, I don't know that massive Part B information will get shared yet. You are hearing it first. You're getting the sneak peek, and then I'll let her talk more about supporting around 135 days.
No, you did great. You did great. We will go more into it again for those late referrals. But yep, all that. Yeah, I'm going to move on. So let's talk about step 2. Step 2 is the referral. And after planning what they want their transition to look like, we will make that referral to Part B for families who have not opted out. At this time, we know that the C2B referral and portal will be in a part of our new database. We don't know exactly what it will look like yet. But the plan is that the referral will still go to the state automatically through the database, and that the paper form will still be used with local education agencies. So you'll still be giving that to schools, just however you are doing it now. Throughout this presentation, but also you will notice in policy statements, referral and notification are used pretty interchangeably. So I don't always have it written this way, but they are used interchangeably. A notification to Part B is the same as making a referral to Part B. So just so we're on the same page. So for children who meet that potentially eligible for Part B services, and that is Part C has to make that referral in the appropriate timelines. So there are 2 groups of children, again, who are potentially eligible for B. Those that have been in services with us, meaning they've been active, had an active IFSP, must be referred no more than 9 months and no fewer than 90 days unless they've opted out. And this timeline, just as you're noticing, is affected by our new opt-out policy of 135 days to make a decision. So that shortens that time frame to 4.5 months before the child turns age 3. Just as we do now, we will have families who know hands down which way they want to go, and they would never dream of opting out. And we're going to have families that don't want to make the decision until day 136. So our processes will have to become flexible enough to allow for that to happen. For children who are potentially eligible for Part B because they were made eligible for C between 90 and 45 days, right before their 3rd birthday, they would be referred to Part B as soon as possible after the evaluation is complete and eligibility is determined, right? That's the same. The difference is unless they opted out. So at that time that we determine their eligibility and they are making decisions about moving forward, we have to present them with the opt-out policy again and paperwork. For families that don't make a decision and get the form returned to you in 135 days, you must make that referral to Part B. Whatever the family decides, all children can stay in infant toddler services until they turn 3.
So just to clarify, in the new policy, the paper C2B referral form will still be required.
Yes.
In the new policy, is it still written that under some circumstances, the transition planning conference can happen at the same time?
Under some circumstances, not always, not as a general rule, because the 3 steps now are, especially the first step and explaining the opt-out policy and the timeline for the policy, we will not routinely be putting them together. When we get to late referrals to Part C, we will talk about when they can be combined.
I think I answered other questions in the chat.
Okay.
I think I did.
They'll let us know if you didn't.
Mhm.
The referral form is actually pretty simple. It contains the child's name, date of birth, parent's name, and contact information, right? Once the referral is made, and it is made to the school of the child's residence at the time of referral. Sometimes they move after that referral, right? And we assist families informally connecting to them to their new school, but we do not do it formally in the database. So once we've put a good referral, if you will, a compliant referral in the database, we don't change that. At this time, that's how our new database will work too. So we just enter the first referral made to Part B, even for families who moved. And then we informally help them connect with their new school and do things, keep notes, but we do not enter it on the official transition documents. Once the referral made to Part B, they're required to send procedural safeguards to the family. So as an FSC, we need to prepare families that that's going to happen so they're not surprised when it arrives. We want to reassure them that once they get those procedural safeguards, they still have lots of rights. They still have lots of decisions to make, and nothing else really happens without their consent to do so. So if they agree to hold a transition conference and agree to have a Part B representative attend, Part B is required to attend. And that kind of leads us into the transition conference and paperwork. So just for referral, any other Anything else that's just referral?
One question, what if the family wants a different district from the beginning, which I think means a different district than the child resides, maybe?
Right. And again, the requirement is that we send the referral to the district that the child resides. So we must send that referral and then work informally with the other district that could be involved. The first district of residence also needs to be informed that the family wants to be going to that other district. So the communication between those two parties is really important too. Also, when families know this, they may or may not want to hold a transition conference or a transition, or they may want to opt out of that referral to be to that one that they know they're not going to go to. But they could still hold a transition conference with community members. Oh, that probably wouldn't make sense. Sorry, going down a rabbit hole and I'm going to stop myself. Sorry, guys.
Think we're good?
All right, let's talk about transition conference because there's lots of questions about it. So the policy states that for children who are potentially eligible for B, the infant toddler program with the approval of the family will convene a transition conference. For children who have been in services, it will occur within that 9 months to 90 days. It also states that we will make reasonable efforts to include all appropriate service providers to discuss the services. Our visits with OSIP last year really talked a lot about making sure that we are involving at a minimum Head Start and childcare. And so you'll see that our transition paperwork has changed to include those people as well. The parent verbally consents to the transition conference during the transition planning meeting. If a family opts out of referral to B, they can still hold a transition conference. Part B just wouldn't be invited, but other people would. If the family chooses not to hold a transition conference, then one isn't held with anybody. But the referral to B must still be sent unless the family opted out, right? That's how they work together. Transition conference is considered an IFSP meeting and therefore must meet the IFSP meeting requirements. We went over them: time and place, multidisciplinary representation, and prior written notice, of course, of the meeting as well. The conference, transition conference form is part of the IFSP. It's embedded there. So some tweaks for when Part B is invited. The infant toddler service program must invite the LEA representative, so your local school representative, to the transition conference if the child is potentially eligible and has not opted out. They have to be invited at least 10 days prior to the conference if your timeline allows. Infant toddler services should attempt to coordinate with the LEA. I know you guys are already doing this, to schedule a meeting time and date where they can attend within the required time frame. The only real difference is that the policy requires that somehow we are documenting that we are inviting them and have a date that we have invited them. It can be text messages back and phone. It can be phone messages back and forth, but we have to have documentation on inviting them. The 10 days is if time allows. So in those instances, when you're in a hurry, when timelines are shorter, you may not have 10 days and they've already agreed. So of course, that's when you would make that exception that they don't have 10 days. You don't have to write anything. There isn't a permission form that they have to sign. Parents can delay the transition conference. Parents have always been able to do that. The LEA can't cause you to hold it late by not agreeing to a date and time. The requirement is that we invite them with as much notice as we can give them. And if they don't come, they don't come. So we also are going to document, though, our efforts to get them there, right? If the LEA is unable to attend, if the representative doesn't come, we still hold the conference as scheduled. And we have to cover some of the pieces of the conversation that Part B would typically do. Documentation can be family service coordinator log, copies of texts, etc. It does not need to be a prior written notice form, but it can be if you want to use one to notify your school. It's fine, but it's not required. Prompts on the form will continue to ensure that we cover the required topics at transition conference. We'll see that in just a second. But briefly, they are that the discussion between for Part B should focus on exploring what services might be available for a child in the preschool program, what the evaluation process looks like, what other activities would need to be addressed in order for the child to begin those services. It's a time of exploration, taking families' questions and preparing them for what it might look like if they attended a preschool or other community program. It's not a time for Part B to start screening or assessing a child. If they need to do those processes, they should plan for those to happen after the transition conference.
So
I'm going to clarify. No, they don't do a screening after the transition conference, right? Is that what popped up? There should not be, what I'm trying to say is there should not be conversation about, does your child do this? Does he do this? Does he do this? Does he do this? We are not doing an assessment as part of the transition conference. The agenda is really clear what Part B's role is. They are able to gather information and make a decision about what their evaluation process will look like. That's if they need to do that beyond what has already been shared with them, that's what needs to happen afterwards. Not, I need to sign you up to come to a screening, or I need you to come in so I can do a developmental screening with you. Tammy, other words, other ways?
no, I think that's good.
Okay.
There's just a lot of questions in the chat, and a lot of different spends. And so a lot of them say we're on the initial kind of recommendations with the cradle and career stuff. And why is that still there? And what I put in the chat is there's a lot of way bigger state agencies conversations happening around data sharing. And so Part C has been directed by way up high state level Kansas that they need to leave that for now, because the powers that are working through negotiations of what data sharing would look like. And I know that's really high level, which is why we don't have any new guidance to tell you what to be put in there, but it was very clear directed that had to stay. Another question was just to clarify the policy timeline. The opt-out policy timeline is that 9 months to 135 days, correct? And then does the parent need to waive their right to a 10-day notice for a transition conference IFSP that was held less than 10 days ahead of time? Do they still need to waive their rights for the 10-day notice? I think that catches you up.
Okay. So we're good. We can move on. They've been answered.
And then there's a lot of questions about not a lot of questions. There are questions about if a district refuses to attend a conference in person that's invited in person, what can we do? And that's just going to have to be a deeper level conversation that we can't answer right now. Right now, state Part B stance on it is that virtual is accepted. And because that's state Part B stance, state Part C cannot tell state Part B what their regulation says or does. And so there's still conversations about what does the federal government mean by that? What does it look like? And so the best clarification I can give you is that right now it's being allowed that the LEAs can come virtually. But we will keep working on it. Like I said, that's not an in conversation, that's in discussion at the state level, what that means. So to be continued.
This is the transition conference first page. It looks quite a bit different as far as the whole thing, and we'll get to that. On the first page, you still put the date the conference is held. And then A, B, and C is all about what's going on with the family. So A is sharing family strengths, challenges, outcomes they've been working toward, any information they feel is important for everybody at the meeting to know about their child. B is the FSC, ensuring that everyone who has joined the meeting has had a chance to introduce themselves. You might do B before you do A. And then C is you give a brief summary of the child's history in infant toddler services. So this is our opportunity to discuss the child's progress, what thoughts the team has, helpful information about the child that would help them in a new setting. It's a time to affirm the plans for what the family has shared with you, what they would like their transition to look like. So the next section is Part B services. So if Part B is there, then we would fill out this section for Part B. Sorry, let me do this again. If the family has not opted out, and if the family is inviting Part B to their transition conference, then Part B would be the person who facilitates this part of the conversation. If they were invited but were unable to attend at the last minute for some reason, then the FSC explains these parts of the transition with Part B. So we need to know, as family service coordinators, some information about what services might look like for a child in Part B. Lots of places you've shared information between the two programs. Part B has some brochures or some flyers that are able to be shared. But these are the topics. These are the things that Part B is supposed to cover in a transition conference. So when I was saying earlier about not getting into an evaluation or screening process, this is exploration. This is talking about what do Part B services, what could they look like if your child was eligible? What other things do you need to know? What other things and timelines might we need to meet in order to make sure that the transition goes as smoothly as possible?
So
Go ahead.
This question is, I'll just say it, it's going to have a layered answer. She's saying, to clarify, Part B is not supposed to ask any questions to the parents regarding developmental skills or milestones during a transition conference. I don't know if I would go that far. But
yeah,
please,
we're not going to get in the weeds. Some of these, I think we need to kind of put a halt to a little bit, and you can look for guidance documents as we write the process manual. This is helpful to know that that's the level that we need to go to in writing those documents. Again, there have been years of conversations about, can they do screening during this time? Can they, so yeah, let's table those until we can get a time and place when we can delve more deeply into that and have agreed upon the state what that should look like. Sorry to disappoint whoever asked the question. I'm going to go back for just a second. This is it. This is the only piece that's Part B specific. So I think before, like when we think of our old form, it feels like that's just all Part B stuff. This has now been condensed. This is where you will have your prompts as to what should be discussed. And this is where you'll put your discussion plans and timelines and what happened at the meeting, what plans were made. The next section is for Head Start, and there's another one that is for childcare services. Head Start specifically is that E, childcare is F, and G is in the wrong place. I'll just tell you that needs to be moved down on the form. And we didn't catch it before we got to this training. So we will be moving G. Let me talk about these two. So each of them, Head Start and childcare services, if families want a representative there, this is when we would be talking about eligibility requirements for those community services. Availability, what does it look like? When could my child potentially start? Steps for enrollment, any other kind of activities that have to take place for their child to participate. I'll explain G because this is where it's at. G would apply to all children. So the next section is about wrapping up the meeting for all children. G is the plan for the child from the time of their 3rd birthday until the start of the new program. And it actually needs to be in this next section. So again, this is just what happens from now until this child's 3rd birthday. For most kids, they're going to stay in our services until the day before they turn 3. This is where G will go to. It's the last section. It applies to all children. H is the steps and activities that we might plan with a family to prepare for new service setting, and will depend upon the options that are available to that family within their community. It allows for some I is post-referral follow-up, quick consultation with the new staff serving the child. As an FSC, we continue to facilitate transition until we are assured that the child's receiving their new services. So this is that little leeway where we're going to say, we're going to check in, make sure that everything's going well, make sure we get to where we were planning to get to. And J is for any other activity or suggestion that needs follow-up and hasn't landed somewhere else. Helping families connect with families together or any other kind of resource could potentially go there. Any other questions about that process and form that doesn't take us down too much of a rabbit hole? Because we still want to get through late referrals.
They're sharing a lot in the chat. I just don't know that it's questions at this point. I think they're just
Sharing.
sharing.
So following the transition conference and the Part B evaluation of children, following the transition conference, Part B and the Part B evaluation, who for children who went to Part B for their process, there is an eligibility meeting that is held. If the family has opted to invite you to this meeting, it's our responsibility to make every effort to possibly attend. Prior to this meeting, you might consider discussing with the family who would be there. So lots of times it's a good idea for us to help families understand who might be at any potential Part B meeting, what that will look like, the questions. We want to make sure families have the questions that they want to be able to ask of Part B. That can happen during this meeting. We can also assist families to prepare for the outcome of the eligibility either way. So what happens if they're not eligible? What happens if they are? and what to do if the family doesn't agree with their eligibility decision, informing them of their rights, making sure that they have dispute information or mediation information, connecting them with the organizations that help with that, such as Families Together.
Oh, no.
Late referrals to Part C. Policies have been updated in response to the OSA visit. Guidance and documents are ongoing. So again, your questions will be used in the formation of those. It sounds like we have a lot of questions and comments to discuss. Also, just want to reiterate, these are policies that take effect July 1st. And so until that time, you're doing just what you're doing now, until you get the new policy manual and the process manual. But this is a sneak peek to give you a taste of what's to come. So breaking it down into categories, the first would be those children referred to Part C between 135 and 90 days before they turn 3. So here's our 135 days again. So children are considered a late referral to Part C if they are referred 4.5 months or less before their 3rd birthday. OSIP guidance materials have been designed to embrace that timeline. And so, as we mentioned before, that 4.5 months of planning time, with families' consent, we have to determine eligibility and write the initial IFSP. And that initial IFSP must include a transition plan. So what does Part C have to do? If they are referred 90 days before their 3rd birthday, we have to do the option of, and families always consent. So we have to give them the opportunity to have an evaluation with us and an initial IFSP with us. And when we write that initial IFSP, we have to include transition planning as part of that. At the eligibility determination for those families, that's when they are presented with their opt-out of referral to Part B. Eligibility determination is provided to families formally when we use an prior written notice form. So when you are providing that form to the family, you will also be providing the opt-out information. If families don't opt out, then we'll send the referral. For these families, the transition conference can be combined with the initial IFSP. So the new policy statements define the time when you can combine transition conference and transition planning as only a time when we are addressing, working with families who have been referred late to Part C. All other families, so if they are following the typical process, they came in at 2, there's lots of time, then they would experience the transition steps in those 3 that we've talked about today, with time in between each meeting. Part B's requirement is to determine eligibility for these children, and if they're eligible, to create and implement an IEP by that child's 3rd birthday. Create and implement an IEP, by that child's 3rd birthday. And these children stay in our services until their 3rd birthday. The next group of kids would be anytime eligibility is determined at least 90 days before the child turns 3. All transition activities are basically completed. The steps are the same as the last slide. Families are given their opt-out at the time of eligibility. If they don't opt out, we send the referral, and we can combine the transition conference. Part B must determine eligibility by the child's third birthday, have the IEP in place and implemented, and that children stay in our services until 3. So for those children that we find eligible for Part C services between 90 and 45 days before the child's third birthday. I'm going to say it again. We find them eligible for services between 90 and 45 days. With consent, we develop an IFSP and we have a transition plan as part of that. The same steps. We emphasize that for these kids, the referral to B will go as soon as possible after eligibility determination and prior to the IFSP meeting. At that eligibility determination, families have to be presented with their option to opt out of referral. If they don't opt out or don't give us that form, we send the referral as soon as possible. The referral happens before the IFSP is in place. The transition conference can be combined, and unless the family opts out, Part B would be invited to that transition conference. Part B has to determine eligibility for these children, and if eligible, create and implement an IEP by the child's third birthday. And the kids stay in our services until they're 3. If the child's referred to us less than 45 days before that child's third birthday, Infant Toddler Services is not required to conduct an initial evaluation, assessment, or IFSP meeting. If we suspect that the child has a disability, then we get parent consent to make a referral to the SEA and LEA. This has to be written consent. If we can't get a written consent to send the referral, we give the family information so that they can make the referral themselves. If the program chooses to conduct an evaluation, if the Infant Toddler Services chooses to do an evaluation for children referred fewer than 45 days, they can refer that SEA and appropriate LEA unless the family opts out. If the child is determined eligible for Part C services less than 45 days, the school is not held to having Part B services in place by the child, the time the child turns 3. Questions, Tammy, that we want to bring forward?
Did you say, hold on. Oh, yeah. Yes. No, I don't think she did. So what it says is, did you say that the child can stay in our services until 3 if they qualify for Part B? Don't they stop when the IEP is initiated?
They have to stop if the IEP services are initiated. Absolutely.
Does the
So
opt-out?
writing an IFSP does not initiate service. So you can have the IEP meeting before the child turns 3. In fact, you're supposed to, right? But the services are to start when school starts for that child or when they're going to come to school. If that happens, if their services start, we have to stop.
School district, go ahead and evaluate at this time, but can go past the age 3 before writing an IEP. So on late referrals, is the timeline the third birthday, or can they go past the third birthday on our late referrals?
So for children referred fewer than 45 days, they do not have to get that child in before 3.
Which is current now.
Right. It's the
That's not-
same as it is now. Nothing
That's-
changed.
That's not an actual, yeah.
Early transition. This is kind of related to that one question. Kids can transition to Part B services, preschool services prior to the age of 3. If it makes sense to do so, if that's a district that has chosen to do that, it is something that is allowable within regulation. Most of the time, this is not happening, but it's the same message. We have to stop our services if they start services. The summer birthday policy has been tweaked as well or clarified. So beginning July 1st, children must be exited from Part C services no later than their 3rd birthday, unless funded by the LEA to continue. So there are some programs who are offering summer services to children even after they turn 3. And we will no longer be able to do that unless there is agreement with the LEA to fund those children during the summer. They can do that by continuing our IFSP. They can do that by writing an IEP and implementing that. But if they want the Part C providers to continue to be the providers for those children, then they will have to contract with you or find a way to fund you to do that. Part C will not be able to fund services during the summer birthday, during the summer for children who have turned 3.
So while that digests, I'm going to just go back very clearly. So we're getting a lot of questions because we know sometimes when school districts evaluate, they continue to leave the child in the classroom and the IEP is not necessarily written or implemented. And so what you're looking for is an IEP completed, signed with an implementation date. You cannot go past that implementation date. That is when they're officially receiving Part B services. When they're doing the thing in the classroom, I think reach out to your TA, talk to them one-on-one, but because that gets really tricky. But in general, you're going by the IEP date and the implementation date are the 2 dates you need to know to be able to determine what you should do as Part C. That's the simplest, cleanest way to say it. And then there's a lot of questions about districts sending Part B or Part C kiddos to screening. It has been clear that that is not an appropriate practice, but it is up to Part B to enforce whether that can or cannot happen. But the timelines, it doesn't change their timelines. Whether that be the child's 3rd birthday or within 60 school days, it doesn't change that timeline. So that's just kind of some general overview of a lot of questions touching that. So I'm going to stop there, but that's not changing. That's the same as it's always been.
Yep. We are almost at the end. So I'm just going to say really, really briefly, this is how a school district, these are the different options, how you keep an IFSP in place through the summer, what it would have to contain. Alternately, Part B can implement their IEP, but that would be a contracting situation if they wanted Part C to do that. You have the right to say, no, I don't want to do that. That's totally up to you. The message today is that at this time, the policy will state that we stop our services when the child turns 3 or earlier if the school implements their IEP early. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't know where that one came from. So this is time for questions as it allows. We are done with the presentation. Leslie, you can stop recording if you still are. And we can stick around for questions for a little bit.